The morning air in Echo Park carried that familiar mix of damp concrete, exhaust fumes, and the faint sweetness of blooming jacaranda trees. It was early, still quiet enough that the city hadn't fully woken up, but James was already wide awake. He sat with his back pressed against the cool brick wall of a closed coffee shop, knees drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around himself. His coat, once navy blue but now faded to a dull gray with patches of frayed fabric at the elbows, did little against the chill that clung to the sidewalks even in spring. Still, he didn't complain. Complaining didn't fill your stomach or keep you dry. It just made the hours heavier. Beside him, curled into a tight ball with his nose tucked under his tail, was Max. The dog wasn't much to look at. Scruffy fur the color of dust and old pennies, one ear permanently bent from a long-ago scuffle, ribs just visible beneath his coat. But his eyes, dark and alert, never left James for long. Max had shown up one rainy night 2 winters back, limping and shivering outside a bus stop. James had shared half a stale sandwich, and the dog never left. Since then, they'd become a unit, 2 souls stitched together by circumstance and quiet loyalty. James reached down slowly, careful not to startle him, and scratched behind Max's good ear. The dog let out a soft sigh and leaned into the touch, tail giving a lazy thump against the pavement. "Morning, buddy," James murmured, voice rough from sleep and disuse. He didn't talk much these days. No one really listened, but Max always did. He pulled a slightly crushed granola bar from his backpack, the kind with too many nuts and not enough chocolate, and broke it in half. He ate his portion slowly, savoring each bite like it was a feast, then held out the other half. Max sat up immediately, tail wagging faster now, and took it gently from his hand, careful not to nip his fingers. James smiled, a small, tired thing, but real. He used to be someone people noticed. A foreman on construction sites, respected, reliable. He knew how to read blueprints, how to keep a crew on schedule, how to fix a crooked beam before it became a problem. But then came the fall. A misstep on a wet scaffold, a snapped collarbone, 3 cracked ribs, and a spine that never quite healed right. The medical bills piled up faster than the painkillers could dull the ache. Insurance ran out. Savings vanished. And one day the landlord handed him a notice he couldn't fight. That was 3 years ago. Since then, the streets had become his home, his office, his prison. But Max made it bearable. On nights when the cold bit deep or the noise of the city felt like it was closing in, the dog would press against his side, warm and steady, as if to say, "You're not alone." James checked his few belongings. A worn backpack with a change of socks, a water bottle, a tattered paperback someone had tossed his way, and a small photo tucked in the side pocket, him and his younger sister, smiling in front of a Christmas tree years ago. He didn't look at it often. It hurt too much, but he kept it close like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Around him, the neighborhood began to stir. Joggers passed with earbuds in, eyes forward. Delivery bikes zipped by. A street cleaner rumbled down the block, its bristles scraping the pavement. Most people didn't see James. Or if they did, they looked through him, like he was part of the scenery, as unremarkable as a fire hydrant or a cracked sidewalk tile. He was used to it. Invisibility had its advantages. Less hassle, less judgment, less chance someone would call the cops just for existing. But Max? People noticed Max. Kids would point and whisper. Tourists sometimes stopped to take pictures. Once, a woman had offered James $20 to hold Max for a photo. He'd refused. Not because he didn't need the money. He always needed money. But because Max wasn't a prop. He was family. The sun climbed higher, warming the pavement just enough to take the edge off the morning chill. James stretched his legs out, wincing slightly as his bad knee protested. He stood slowly, testing his balance, then offered Max a hand. The dog hopped up instantly, shaking himself like he was shaking off the night. They walked together toward the lake, their usual morning route. James knew every bench, every patch of shade, every spot where the grass stayed greenest. He also knew which alleys to avoid, which store owners would let him fill his water bottle, and which cops would give him a warning instead of a ticket. Near the lake's edge, they found a quiet spot under a sprawling oak. James sat on the grass and Max flopped down beside him, tongue lolling. Ducks paddled nearby and the water shimmered with reflections of palm trees and passing clouds. For a few peaceful minutes it almost felt normal, like they were just 2 friends enjoying a morning stroll, not 2 survivors clinging to the margins. James pulled out his water bottle and took a sip, then poured a little into his cupped hand for Max. The dog lapped it up gratefully. "You're a good dog," James said, rubbing Max's head. "Better than most people I've met." Max looked up at him, eyes soft, and gave a quiet whine, his way of saying, "I know. And you're good too." They stayed like that for a while, watching the world go by. A couple walked hand in hand. An old man fed breadcrumbs to the pigeons. A street musician sat up near the path, tuning his guitar. Life moved on, bright and busy, and James and Max watched it from the edge, together. But peace on the streets is fragile. It can shatter in an instant. James saw them before Max did. 3 teenagers, loud and restless, kicking an empty soda can down the path. They were dressed in matching hoodies, laughing too hard at nothing. One of them spotted Max and nudged his friend. "Yo, check out that mutt," he said, voice sharp with mockery. James tensed. He pulled Max closer, wrapping an arm around him. "Easy, boy," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. The teens slowed as they passed. One stopped, staring. Max, sensing danger, stood up and let out a low warning growl. It wasn't aggressive, just protective, but it was enough. "Oh, is the little doggy mad?" The tallest one sneered. He took a step closer. "Leave us alone," James said, voice calm but firm. He kept his eyes on the boy, not challenging, just steady. The teen smirked. "Or what, you gonna call your lawyer?" His friends laughed. James didn't respond. He knew better than to escalate. He just held Max tighter, hoping they'd move on. But they didn't. The tallest one glanced around, no cops. No adults paying attention. Then, without warning, he swung his foot and kicked Max hard in the side. The sound was sickening. A sharp yelp, then silence as Max crumpled to the ground, trembling. "No!" James surged to his feet, heart pounding. "Get away from him!" The teens burst into laughter. "Relax, old man. Just playing." One of them shoved James in the chest hard enough to knock him back onto the grass. "Stay down!" he spat. James scrambled toward Max, ignoring the pain in his knee, his hands shaking as he checked the dog. Max was breathing fast, eyes wide with fear, trying to stand but stumbling. The teens walked off, still laughing, high-fiving each other like they'd just scored a goal. James gathered Max into his arms, whispering soothing words, tears burning in his eyes. "It's okay, buddy. I've got you. I've got you." Around them, people kept walking. A woman glanced over, then quickly looked away. A man on a bike slowed for a second, then pedaled faster. No one stopped. No one helped. James held Max tighter, feeling the dog's heartbeat against his own. The world felt cold again, not just the air, but everything. The cruelty. The indifference. The loneliness. He didn't know it yet, but someone had seen. Someone who wouldn't look away. But for now, all he had was Max and the desperate hope that his best friend would be okay. The pain in Max's side came in sharp waves, like someone twisting a knife just under his ribs. He tried to stand, legs wobbling, but collapsed again with a soft whimper. James held him close, rocking slightly, whispering the same words over and over. You're okay, you're safe now." But his voice cracked and his hands trembled. He knew that sound, the yelp, the way Max's body had folded in on itself. It wasn't just a scare. Something was wrong. People kept passing by. A jogger adjusted her earbuds and picked up speed. A couple pushing a stroller veered wide around them, eyes fixed straight ahead. No one asked if they were all right. No one even slowed down long enough to see the fear in Max's eyes or the tears James was trying so hard to blink away. It was like they'd become invisible again. Not just ignored, but erased. James gently ran his hands over Max's body, checking for swelling, for signs of broken bones. The dog flinched when he touched his left side. Easy, James murmured, heart sinking. He knew what this meant. Vet care cost money he didn't have. He'd once tried to take Max to a low-cost clinic after the dog swallowed a piece of plastic, but even the discount fee was more than he could scrape together in a week of panhandling and bottle collecting. The time Max had gotten lucky. His body passed the object on its own. But this felt different. This felt serious. He looked around, desperate. Maybe someone would help. Maybe someone would lend him a few bucks just to get Max looked at. He opened his mouth to ask, but the words died in his throat. Who would believe him? Who would care? He'd learned long ago that asking for help often brought more shame than relief. Max let out a quiet moan and pressed his head into James's chest, as if trying to disappear into him. That small gesture broke something inside James. He couldn't just sit here. He had to do something. Slowly, carefully, he lifted Max into his arms. The dog was light, not because he was small, but because he'd never quite put on enough weight no matter how much James shared his food. James stood, wincing as his knee protested, and started walking toward the edge of the park. He didn't have a plan, just a direction. Away from the spot where cruelty had happened, toward somewhere, anywhere, that might offer a sliver of hope. His usual spots felt too exposed now. The bench near the library, too many people who knew him, who might judge. The alley behind the bakery, too dark, too hidden. He needed a place where Max could rest without being disturbed, where he could think. He found a narrow strip of shade between two buildings, tucked behind a row of recycling bins. It wasn't pretty, but it was quiet. He lowered himself to the ground, cradling Max in his lap. He pulled his coat tighter around them both, creating a makeshift shelter from the world. "Just breathe, buddy," he whispered, stroking Max's head. "We'll figure this out." But doubt gnawed at him. What if Max couldn't walk right again? What if he was in pain every day? James couldn't bear the thought of his dog suffering because he couldn't afford help. The guilt was heavy, like he'd failed the one being who'd never failed him. Time passed slowly. The sun moved across the sky. Max drifted in and out of sleep, each breath shallow but steady. James stayed awake, watching every rise and fall of his chest, listening for any change in his breathing. He thought about the teens, their laughter, their casual cruelty. It wasn't the first time he'd seen people treat animals like toys or trash, but it hurt more when it was your own. Max had never hurt anyone. He barked at squirrels, yes, and sometimes pulled on the leash, but he'd lick your hand if you were crying. He deserved better than this. James reached into his backpack and pulled out the last half of a protein bar he'd been saving for dinner. He broke off a small piece and held it near Max's nose. The dog sniffed weakly but didn't eat. That worried James more than anything. Max always ate. He looked down at his own hands, calloused, cracked, nails dirty. These hands had once built houses, fixed roofs, carried heavy beams. Now they couldn't even protect a dog from a stupid, senseless kick. A sound made him look up. Footsteps. He tensed, pulling Max closer, but it was just a delivery driver wheeling a cart past the alley entrance. The man didn't see them. Or if he did, he didn't react. James sighed. He needed to move. Staying here too long might draw attention, maybe from security, maybe from the wrong kind of people. He gently shifted Max onto his shoulder, using his body to support the dog's weight, and stood. Every step sent a jolt through his bad knee, but he ignored it. Max needed him to be strong. He walked slowly toward the busier part of the neighborhood, hoping someone, anyone, might notice Max's condition and offer help. He passed a coffee shop where people sat outside, sipping lattes and tapping on laptops. He caught a few glances, but they flickered away quickly, like he was a glitch in their peaceful morning. Then, near the corner, he saw a woman walking a small, well-groomed poodle. She looked kind, soft eyes, gentle smile. James took a breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but clear. "My dog, he got hurt. I think he needs a vet. Do you know of any low-cost clinics around here?" The woman stopped. She looked at Max, then at James, then quickly back at her poodle. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, already stepping back. "I don't know. Maybe try downtown?" She hurried away without another word. James stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of rejection. He hadn't asked for money, just information, but even that was too much. He kept walking, head down now, not wanting to meet anyone's eyes. The weight of Max in his arms felt heavier with every step. His arms ached. His knee burned. His throat was tight with unshed tears. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw a black SUV pull over to the curb a short distance ahead. It wasn't flashy, just clean, quiet, expensive in a way that didn't shout. The driver's window rolled down slightly, but James didn't pay attention. He was too focused on Max, on putting one foot in front of the other. What he didn't know was that someone inside that SUV had seen everything. From the moment the teens had kicked Max, a man in the passenger seat had been watching. He'd seen James's desperate plea, the shove, the way the man had gathered his dog like something precious. He'd seen the bystanders look away, and he hadn't looked away himself. Now as James approached, limping slightly, holding his injured dog with such tenderness, the man made a decision. The SUV door opened. James flinched, bracing for another confrontation. But instead of a threat, a calm voice said, "Hey, is he okay?" James looked up. The man standing there wasn't what he expected. No fancy suit, no sunglasses hiding his eyes. Just a guy in a plain black jacket, dark hair slightly messy, eyes full of concern. Not pity, not curiosity, but real human worry. He looked familiar, but James couldn't place him. "Too tired, too stressed, my dog?" "He got kicked," James said, voice rough. "I think he's hurt bad." The man nodded slowly, then knelt down right there on the sidewalk so he was at eye level with Max. He didn't reach out right away. He just looked at the dog, speaking softly. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" Max lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. He didn't growl. Didn't flinch, just watched the man with tired eyes. "He's in pain," James said. "Won't eat. Won't stand." The man glanced up at James. "Do you have a vet?" James shook his head. "Can't afford one." Without hesitation, the man pulled out his phone. "I know a place. They'll see him right away." He spoke quickly but calmly into the phone, giving a name James didn't recognize, saying, "It's urgent. A dog was injured. I'm bringing him in." Then he stood and looked at James. "I'll drive you." "Both of you," James hesitated. Strangers offering help. It rarely ended well. But something in the man's eyes, the lack of judgment, the quiet certainty, made him pause. And Max hadn't growled. That meant something. "Why?" James asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" The man gave a small, sad smile. "Because someone should have stepped in earlier. And because he's your friend." That simple sentence hit James harder than he expected. No grand speech. No, "I feel bad for you," just recognition. Like he saw them, not as a homeless man and a stray dog, but as two beings who mattered. James nodded. "Okay." The man helped him into the passenger seat, then carefully took Max and cradled him in his arms in the back. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, James leaned his head against the window, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in hours, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, Max would be okay. And the man driving? He didn't say much, just kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Max, his expression steady, focused, like this wasn't an interruption, like it was exactly where he was supposed to be. James didn't know his name, didn't know why he was so kind. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that someone had finally seen them, and chosen to stay. The SUV moved smoothly through the streets, quiet except for the hum of the engine and Max's shallow breathing from the back seat. James sat stiffly in the passenger seat, hands resting on his knees, still half expecting this to be a dream or a trick. But the warmth of the car, the clean smell of leather and faint cedar, the way the man drove with calm focus, it all felt too real to be made up. He stole glances at the driver. There was something familiar about him, like a face seen on a screen long ago, but James couldn't place it. Too many years on the street had blurred his memory of movies, of news, of anything that wasn't survival. Still, the man didn't act like someone famous. He didn't check his phone constantly or talk into a headset. He just drove, eyes on the road, one hand occasionally reaching back to gently stroke Max's head. "You've had him a while?" the man asked after a few minutes, voice low and steady. "Couple of years," James said. "Found him shivering under a bus bench. He followed me home. Well, not home. You know what I mean." The man nodded. "He's lucky he found you." James almost laughed bitterly. "I'm the lucky one." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet two people share when they're both holding something heavy and don't need to explain it. Soon, they pulled into the parking lot of a small animal clinic, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. It wasn't flashy, just a clean storefront with a green awning and a sign that read Paw Care Wellness. The man turned off the engine and got out, then opened the back door and carefully lifted Max into his arms again. James hurried to follow, his knee protesting with every step. Inside, the clinic smelled like antiseptic and warm towels. A woman at the front desk looked up, surprised, then her eyes softened when she saw Max. "Keanu," she said, standing quickly. "You said it was urgent?" The man Keanu nodded. He was kicked. Can't stand well. Breathing fast, she didn't ask questions. Didn't check insurance or demand payment up front. She just waved them through a side door. "Exam room 2, Dr. Lynn's free." James followed, heart pounding. This wasn't how it usually worked. Usually there were forms, waiting lists, price quotes that made your stomach drop. But here, people moved like they already knew what mattered. In the exam room, a vet with kind eyes and rolled-up sleeves gently took Max from Keanu's arms and laid him on the padded table. She spoke softly, her hands moving with practiced care as she checked his pulse, his gums, his ribs. Max whimpered once but didn't pull away. "He's in pain," she said quietly. "Possible bruising or a cracked rib. We'll need an X-ray to be sure." Keanu didn't hesitate. "Do it." James opened his mouth to say he couldn't pay, to offer to work it off, to beg, but Keanu placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said, so softly only James could hear. "Let them help him." Those words undid something in James. He nodded, throat tight, and stepped back to let the professionals do their work. While Max was taken to the back for X-rays, Keanu led James to a small waiting area with 2 chairs and a coffee machine. He poured 2 cups, black, no sugar, and handed one to James. "Drink, you look like you haven't eaten." James took the cup with trembling hands. The warmth seeped into his palms. He hadn't realized how cold he'd been, not just from the morning air but from fear. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "I don't even know why you're doing this." Keanu sat down across from him, elbows on his knees, cup cradled in his hands. "I saw what happened," he said simply. "And I've been in places where no one stepped in. I didn't want that to be today." James looked at him, really looked. There was no performance in his eyes, no hidden agenda. Just a man who'd seen someone hurting and chose to act. "You didn't have to," James said. "Most people don't." "I know," Keanu replied. "But most people aren't holding their best friend in their arms while he's in pain." James looked down at his coffee. He wanted to say more. How Max was the only thing that kept him going on the worst nights. How he talked to the dog when the loneliness got too loud. How Max would nudge his hand when he woke up crying from old nightmares. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked, "Do you have dogs?" Keanu's expression softened. "I did, a long time ago. Her name was Eva. She got sick." He paused, then added, "Losing her felt like losing part of my heart. I can't imagine going through that and not being able to help her." James understood then. This wasn't charity. It was memory. It was love echoing across time. A few minutes later, the vet returned with Max, now wrapped in a soft blanket, and a folder of X-rays. "Good news," she said. "No broken bones, but he's got deep bruising on his left side and a minor strain. He'll be sore for a few days, maybe a week. Needs rest, pain meds, and lots of water." Relief washed over James, so strong he almost swayed in his chair. "He'll be okay?" "He will," she said, smiling. "But he needs to stay calm. No running, no jumping. And he should be kept warm." Keanu stood. "What does he need?" The vet listed it. Anti-inflammatory meds, a soft bed, follow-up in 3 days. Then she named a price. Before James could even process the number, Keanu pulled out his wallet. "I'll cover it." "No," James said quickly. "I can't let you." "You're not letting me," Keanu said gently. "I'm choosing to. And Max needs this. That's all that matters," James wanted to argue, to insist on paying him back somehow. But the vet was already preparing the meds, and Max was looking at him with those trusting eyes, like he knew everything would be all right now. So James stayed quiet. He accepted the small bottle of liquid medicine, the printed care instructions, the bag of soft dog food the clinic gave them, just in case. He held Max close as they walked back to the SUV, the dog already seeming a little more relaxed, his breathing slower, deeper. On the drive back toward Echo Park, Keanu didn't head straight to the spot where they'd met. Instead, he pulled over near a small park with benches and trees. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" he asked. James shook his head. They sat on a bench under a pepper tree, Max curled between them, finally asleep. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled light on the pavement. Keanu didn't ask personal questions. He didn't pry. He just said, "You've got a good heart. And Max knows it." James looked at the ground. "I haven't always been like this. I used to have a job, a place, people. Life doesn't always go the way we plan," Keanu said, "but that doesn't mean you stop being who you are." They sat in silence for a while, watching pigeons peck at crumbs. Then Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. "There's a program not far from here. They help people get back on their feet. And they allow pets." James took the card. It had a logo, a phone number, and the words, Second Chance Housing, Pet-Friendly Transitional Support. "I know a guy who runs it," Keanu said. "Tell him I sent you. They've got openings." James stared at the card like it was a lifeline. "Why are you doing all this?" Keanu looked at Max, now snoring softly. "Because kindness shouldn't be rare, and because you and Max deserve more than surviving. You deserve to live." James didn't cry, not then. But something inside him shifted, like a door he thought was welded shut had just creaked open. Before they left, Keanu handed him a folded $20 bill. "For food. For you and him." James tried to refuse, but Keanu just pressed it into his hand. "Take it. Pay it forward someday." As the SUV drove away, James stood on the sidewalk, Max in his arms, the card and the money tucked safely in his pocket. The world hadn't changed, the traffic still roared. The building still loomed, but something in him had. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible, he felt seen. The card felt heavy in James's pocket, not because of its weight, but because of what it promised. Hope, a chance, something he hadn't let himself believe in for a long time. He walked slowly back toward his usual spot near the lake. Max still cradled in his arms, now sleeping more peacefully, his breathing steady and deep. The medicine was already working, dulling the sharp edges of pain. That night, instead of settling into his usual corner behind the recycling bins, James found a quieter place under a covered bus stop. He laid out his thin sleeping mat, wrapped Max in his coat like a blanket, and sat beside him, watching the stars blink on one by one. He kept touching the card in his pocket as if to make sure it was real. The next morning, Max was able to stand on his own. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side, but his tail wagged when James offered him a bite of scrambled eggs someone had given him from a diner's back door. That small sign, tail wagging, eyes bright, gave James the courage he needed. He found a public library, used their free Wi-Fi to look up the number on the card, and called. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, no judgment, just calm questions. "How long have you been unhoused?" "Do you have any income?" "Are you currently in treatment or on medication?" James answered honestly, expecting to be turned away at any moment. But she just took notes and said, "We have a unit available. If you can come in for an intake interview tomorrow morning, we'll see what we can do." He showed up early, clean as he could be after washing up at a gas station sink, Max on a frayed but clean leash. The building was modest, a converted apartment complex with fresh paint and flower boxes under the windows. Inside, it smelled like coffee and floor cleaner. The woman from the phone, named Linda, greeted him with a handshake and a smile that reached her eyes. She didn't ask for a deposit, didn't demand a credit check. She asked about Max first. "How's he doing?" she said, kneeling to let him sniff her hand. "He's getting better," James said, voice thick with surprise that someone cared. The interview wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation. She asked about his work history, his health, his goals. When he mentioned construction, her eyes lit up. "We partner with a local trades program. They offer training and job placement. Would you be interested?" James nodded, stunned. "I'd do anything to get back on my feet," she smiled. "Then let's get you started." By the end of the week, James had a key. A real key. To a small studio apartment with a bed, a sink, a tiny fridge, and a window that opened to a patch of sky. And best of all, a sign on the door that said, "Pets Welcome." Moving in felt surreal. He carried his few belongings in a backpack and a grocery bag. Max trotted beside him, nose to the ground, tail wagging like he knew this was different. When James opened the door and stepped inside, Max ran in circles, sniffing every corner, then flopped down on the bare floor like he owned the place. James stood in the middle of the room, tears finally spilling over. Not tears of sadness, but of disbelief. A roof, 4 walls, a door he could lock. A place where Max wouldn't get kicked for existing. He called the clinic to schedule Max's follow-up. The vet was happy to hear he was walking again. "Keep him calm for another few days," she said. "But he's healing well." James followed the instructions to the letter. He gave Max his medicine on time, made a soft bed from donated blankets, and sat with him every evening talking about nothing and everything, the weather, the birds outside, the way the light hit the wall in the afternoon. It felt strange to speak out loud again, to have someone who listened. A few days later, a package arrived at the front desk of the building. No return address, just his name. Inside was a new dog bed, a bag of high-quality food, a chew toy shaped like a bone, and a note that read, "For Max, keep him strong." James held the note for a long time. He didn't know how Keanu had found him, and he didn't need to. The gesture said enough. He started the trades program the following Monday. It was tough. His body wasn't as strong as it used to be, and his knee still ached in the rain, but he showed up every day. The instructors were patient. They saw his experience, not just his past. One of them even said, "You've got the hands of a builder. We can work with that." At night, he came home to Max waiting by the door, tail wagging like James was the best thing that ever happened to him. And maybe James thought he was one evening, as he sat on the floor eating a simple dinner of rice and beans, Max resting his head on his knee. James pulled out the old photo from his backpack, the one of him and his sister. He hadn't looked at it in years, but now, for the first time, he didn't feel crushed by the memory. He felt like maybe he could reach out. Maybe she'd want to know he was okay. He wrote a letter that night, short, honest, no excuses. Just, "I'm getting help. I'm safe. Max is too. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." He didn't send it right away, but he kept it on his nightstand, like a promise he was finally ready to keep. Weeks passed. Max's limp disappeared. His coat grew shinier. He barked at squirrels again, pulled on the leash during walks, and curled up beside James every night like nothing bad had ever happened. And James? He started sleeping through the night. He stopped flinching at loud noises. He looked people in the eye when he spoke. One afternoon, while walking Max near Echo Park, this time on a clean leash, wearing shoes that didn't have holes, he passed the spot where it had happened. The same bench. The same path. He paused for a moment, not with fear, but with quiet resolve. He knelt and scratched Max behind the ears. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. Max looked up at him, tongue out, eyes full of trust. James stood, straightened his shoulders, and kept walking, forward, not back. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in years, it felt like it held something good, and he wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, a quiet man in a black jacket had changed everything. Not with a grand speech or a camera crew, but with a single choice: to see, to stop, to care. And James? He decided he'd do the same for someone else someday. Because kindness, he was learning, wasn't a rare thing. It was a ripple, and ripples could become waves. 3 months had passed since that morning by the lake, the morning that felt like the end of everything, but turned out to be the beginning. Now, James stood in the doorway of his small apartment watching Max chase a sunbeam across the floor. The dog wasn't just healed, he was thriving. His coat gleamed, his step was light, and his bark, once rare and cautious, now rang out with confidence whenever the mail carrier passed by. The apartment itself was still modest, just one room with a kitchenette, a narrow bed, and a window that opened to a view of palm trees and distant rooftops. But to James, it felt like a palace. There was running water that didn't taste like rust, a door that locked from the inside, a place where he could leave his shoes by the entryway without worrying they'd be gone in the morning, and most importantly, a home where Max belonged just as much as he did. James had started his construction training program full-time. At first, he'd worried his body wouldn't keep up. His knee still ached when it rained, and his hands sometimes cramped from old injuries. But the instructors saw his experience, his quiet focus, and his willingness to learn. "You've got the instincts," one of them told him after he fixed a crooked frame without being asked. "That's something you can't teach." He was saving money now, small amounts, but real. Enough to buy groceries, replace his worn-out boots, and even put a little aside for Max's next vet checkup. He'd sent the letter to his sister 2 weeks ago. No reply yet, but just sending it had lifted a weight he'd carried for years. One Tuesday morning, as he sipped coffee at the kitchenette table, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the usual maintenance worker or neighbor. It was Linda from the housing program, holding a clipboard and smiling. "There's a reporter from the local news," she said gently. "They're doing a story on pet-friendly housing for people coming out of homelessness. They heard about you and Max through the clinic. Would you be open to talking? No pressure. And you can say no to cameras." James hesitated. He didn't want to be a spectacle. Didn't want people gawking at his past like it was entertainment. But then he looked at Max, who trotted over and sat proudly at his feet as if to say, We've got nothing to hide. Okay, James said. But only if Max can be in it too. The interview happened in the small courtyard behind the building. The reporter was kind, asked about Max first, about how hard it was to find help when you had a pet, about what this program meant to him. James spoke slowly at first, then more freely. He didn't mention the kick, not in detail, just said Max had been hurt and someone stepped in when no one else would. He didn't name Keanu. That didn't feel right. Some kindnesses weren't meant for headlines, but the story ran anyway. Not as a viral sensation, but as a quiet human interest piece. Man and dog find stability through new pet-inclusive housing program. It showed James sanding wood at his training site, Max waiting patiently on a blanket nearby. It showed them walking together in the park, James smiling, a real relaxed smile that reached his eyes. The response surprised everyone. Donations poured into the housing program. Not just money, but dog beds, leashes, food, even volunteer hours from local vets offering free checkups. The city council took notice. A new proposal was drafted to expand pet-friendly units in transitional housing across the county. James didn't seek any of it. He just kept showing up for his classes, for Max, for himself. One afternoon, while walking Max near the outreach center Keanu had visited that day, James saw a man sitting alone on a bench, shoulders slumped, a thin dog curled at his feet. The dog looked underfed. The man looked exhausted. James recognized that look, the kind that said, "I'm barely holding on." He stopped. Max sat beside him, tail giving a slow wag. "Hey," James said softly. "You okay?" The man looked up, wary at first, then saw Max, healthy, clean, calm, and his guard dropped a little. "Just tired," he said. James nodded. He didn't offer empty platitudes. Didn't say it gets better. Instead, he sat on the bench a respectful distance away. "My name's James. This is Max. We've been where you are." He told his story simply, no drama, no self-pity. Just facts, the fall, the streets, the kick, the stranger in the SUV, the card, the apartment, the second chance. Then he pulled a folded brochure from his pocket, the one from the housing program, and handed it over. "They take dogs," he said, "and they don't make you choose between your pet and a roof." The man took the brochure with trembling hands. "I didn't think places like that existed." "They do now," James said, "because someone believed they should." He stayed a few more minutes sharing the name of the low-cost clinic, the hours of the outreach center's free meal service. Before he left, he handed the man a small bag of dog food from his own stash. "For tonight," he said. As he walked away, Max trotting beside him, James felt something shift inside, not pride, but purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was part of something bigger. Keanu never came back, never posted about it online, never asked for thanks. But James knew, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple over the city, James sat on his fire escape with Max beside him. The air was warm, the neighborhood humming with life. Music from an open window, kids laughing down the block, the distant chime of an ice cream truck. Max rested his head on James's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. James reached into his pocket and pulled out the old photo, him and his sister years ago, smiling under twinkling Christmas lights. He hadn't heard back from her yet, but for the first time that didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a door left open. He looked out at the city, not as a place that had broken him, but as one that had slowly, quietly, let him heal. People passed below, rushing to jobs, to dinners, to lives full of noise and worry and joy. Most of them would never know what happened that day by the lake. They'd never know how one act of courage, stepping in when others looked away, had stitched hope back into two lives. But James knew, and Max knew, and sometimes that's all that matters. He scratched Max behind the ears the way he had that very first night they met. "We're gonna be okay, buddy," he said. Max sighed, a deep, happy sound, and leaned into his touch. And in that moment, under a sky full of stars, they were more than okay. They were home. The story was never supposed to have a sixth part. 5 felt complete, like a quiet arc from brokenness to belonging, from invisibility to dignity. But life doesn't always wrap up in neat chapters. Sometimes it keeps writing itself in small, unexpected ways. 6 months after moving into the apartment, James stood on a real job site, not as a trainee, but as a hired hand. He wore a hard hat, steel-toed boots that didn't leak, and a tool belt that felt natural on his hips. The sun beat down, sweat trickled down his back, and his knee ached in the familiar way it always did by mid-afternoon. But this time the ache didn't mean weakness. It meant he was working. He was earning. He was building something, not just walls and roofs, but a future. His crew didn't know his whole story, and he didn't offer it unless asked. But they saw how he showed up early, how he double-checked measurements, how he stayed late to clean up. One of the older guys clapped him on the shoulder one day and said, "You've got the right kind of quiet, kid. The kind that gets things done." At lunch, James sat on a stack of plywood eating a sandwich he'd made that morning. Real bread, real cheese, not scraps from a dumpster, and pulled out his phone. It wasn't fancy, just a second-hand one from the Outreach Center's tech program, but it worked. He scrolled to a photo he'd taken last week. Max sitting proudly in front of their apartment door, wearing a new blue collar with a little metal tag that read, "Max Loved." He smiled. Sent it to the only number he'd added with hope. Still no reply from his sister. But he kept sending little updates, nothing heavy, just moments. Max chasing a leaf, the view from his window after rain, a plate of spaghetti he'd cooked for the first time in years. He didn't expect anything back. He just wanted her to know he was okay in case she ever wondered. Back at the apartment that evening, James found a small envelope taped to his door. No stamp, no return address, just his name written in neat handwriting. His heart jumped. For a wild second, he thought it might be from her, but inside was a gift card to a local grocery store, $100, and a note. For good days ahead. Keep building.
James held the note for a long time.
He didn't cry. He just sat on the floor, Max leaning against his leg, and let the quiet gratitude settle in his chest like warmth from a fire. He used the gift card the next day, not just for himself, but for the man he'd met on the bench months ago, who now lived 2 floors down with his own dog, a scrappy beagle named Scout. James bought extra rice, beans, and a big bag of kibble, then knocked on the man's door. "Figured you could use some," he said, handing over half the groceries. The man's eyes got wet. "You didn't have to." "Yeah," James said with a small smile. "But I wanted to." That night, as he cooked dinner, James heard a knock. It was the building manager holding a clipboard. "City rep's coming next week," she said. "They want to feature our program in a housing summit. They asked if you'd be willing to speak, just 5 minutes." About what having Max with you meant, James almost said no. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But then he thought about all the people out there with dogs like Max, loyal, scared, loving, and no place to go because shelters said no pets. He thought about the man downstairs, and the woman he'd seen last week crying outside a shelter that turned her away because of her cat. "Okay," he said, "I'll do it." The day of the summit, he wore his best shirt, clean, pressed, no holes, and walked into a room full of city officials, nonprofit leaders, and housing advocates. His palms were sweaty. His voice shook at first. But then he looked down and saw Max sitting patiently at his feet, leash looped around his own wrist, and he remembered why he was there. "I used to think I had nothing," James said into the microphone, voice low but clear. "But I had Max, and losing him would have broken me. When I got hurt, he stayed. When I cried, he listened. When the world looked away, he looked right at me like I mattered." He paused. "Housing isn't just 4 walls. It's safety. It's dignity. And for a lot of us, it's the dog who keeps us human. If you're building shelters, build them for whole people, not just the parts you find convenient." The room was silent for a beat. Then someone started clapping, then more. Not loud, not showy, just real. Afterward, a woman from the mayor's office approached. "We're expanding the pet-friendly pilot," she said, "and we'd like your input. Would you join the advisory group?" James nodded. "As long as Max can come to meetings," she laughed. "Deal." Weeks later, a new sign went up at the entrance of the housing complex. "All families welcome, fur included." And James's name was listed on a small plaque inside the lobby, not as a success story, but as a community advisor. One rainy afternoon, as he walked Max under an umbrella, his phone buzzed. "Unknown number." He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello?" he said, a woman's voice, soft and hesitant. "Is this James?" His breath caught. "Yeah," a pause. Then, "It's me. Your sister." He stopped walking. Max sat down in the puddle, tail thumping. I got your letters, she said, voice breaking. I didn't know. I thought you were gone for good. I've been so scared to reach out. I'm here, James said, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I'm okay. Max is okay. We've got a place. A real place, she cried then. And he did too. They talked for an hour. About the past, about the years they'd missed, about how she'd looked for him after he disappeared from the system. She lived just 2 towns over. She had kids. She wanted to meet Max. They set a date for the following weekend. When James hung up, he knelt in the rain and hugged Max tight. You ready to meet family, buddy? Max licked his face, tail wagging like he understood. The reunion happened in a quiet park on a sunny Saturday. James wore his good shirt again. Max wore his blue collar. His sister arrived with 2 wide-eyed kids and a picnic basket. She looked older, softer around the eyes, but her smile was the same as in the photo. She cried when she saw him, hugged him so hard he couldn't breathe for a second. Then she knelt and met Max. So this is the hero, she whispered, scratching behind his ears. Max, ever the gentleman, sat perfectly still and let her pet him. They ate sandwiches on a blanket. The kids played with Max, tossing a ball he chased with joyful barks. James watched them, his sister laughing, her children giggling, Max running in happy circles, and felt something settle inside him that had been restless for years. He wasn't fixed. Life still had hard days. But he wasn't alone anymore, and none of it would have happened if one man hadn't stopped his car that morning. If he hadn't seen what others ignored. If he hadn't chosen kindness over convenience. James never told his sister who helped them. He didn't need to. Some stories aren't about names. They're about choices. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and pink, James sat on the grass, Max curled at his feet, his sister's hand resting on his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to survive, it felt like something to live.